We're here this morning with Mrs. Virginia Pounds, and we really appreciate you coming and visiting with us and sharing in memories. I think it's important that we do what we can to, for posterity, cherish and to savor and save memories of recollections that people have of previous eras. And this morning we're going to talk mostly about the World War II era, and you have quite a few memories to share with us. So on behalf of the Georgia National Guard and our senior leadership, I really do thank you for coming. And
you're very welcome.
Absolutely.
I was delighted.
Absolutely. I'm excited about this opportunity. Why don't you share with us this morning what you're doing now? Tell us a little bit about what's happening for you in your life presently.
Well, you'll die laughing. I work full-time.
Okay.
I just celebrated my 90th birthday. I work for Budget Rent-A-Car as a phone agent who makes reservations. And it's rather fun. I think it helps keep me young. I work with a lot of young people, and I know how good they are, not how bad they are. Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of difference. I talk to a lot of people who are so critical of young people, people my age, and I find them delightful.
Well, that's reassuring, and I'm sure that you appreciate young men and women that serve in uniform, too.
Oh, I do.
Absolutely.
I remember a lot of them.
I'm sure, and yes, and we're going
from olden days.
And we're going to talk about that. Why don't you share with us, as we focus mostly on the World War II era, what you were doing then? I understand you were a teacher yourself, and that perhaps gave you an opportunity to contribute.
Toward the end of World War II, I learned to fly in '43. And I went from that to, I worked at the airport in order to pay for my flying career. I was working on, first a private pilot license, and then a flight instructor rating. And my boss suggested that I get a ground school instructor's rating. So I did, and at that time there were a lot of the boys who were pilots in the Army, in the Army Air Force, who were coming back to get civilian licenses. And for some reason, with all they had been through, they had to get a private pilot's license, and in order to get one, they had to go to ground school. So I was teaching them stuff they already knew, for the most part, except some of the aircraft engine stuff I don't think they remembered much about. But that was a wonderful learning experience. I learned to rebuild a four-cylinder engine. Really? And I learned a lot about meteorology, to the point where my mother said, I don't care what kind of clouds there are, is it going to rain?
Right. Too much information, right?
Yes, too much. Well, you get wrapped up in it. I couldn't talk anything but flying for ages.
I can imagine.
And a bunch of the young men that I taught, well, 3 of the young men that I taught became very close friends. They were my brothers. I never had a brother, and they were my big brother and my big brothers and my little brother. And we did everything together, including going to the Cleveland Air Races. And we all bought a Norden bomb sight, which they were selling. What we intended to do with them, I don't know.
Now, where was this specifically, geographically?
This was near Selfridge Air Force Base in Mount Clemens, Michigan.
Oh, and that's near Detroit?
That's near Detroit. It's just south of Detroit on Lake St. Clair. Or north of Detroit on Lake St. Clair.
Right, I see. And let's go ahead and talk about some of these well-known leaders in the military that you got to know on a personal level. Share with us some of those memories.
Well, those go back to when I was very, very young.
Okay.
Jimmy Doolittle and his wife were friends of my parents. Okay. And I remember going to their house when Selfridge had, on the main drag, where they have retreat now. I don't remember where they had it then, because, of course, at 5 I didn't pay any attention. But the officers' quarters were on the main drag, and they were olive drab frame buildings with a great big screen porch, because there was no air conditioning then, of course.
Right.
And this would have been about 25, I guess. I think I was about 5 or 6 years old. And Tui Spots was at that, well, Carl Spots, I should say. Right. General Spots was there then. And I remember them pretty vaguely, but I remember sitting on General Doolittle's lap as a little girl. But then I had an older sister who was very pretty. And she got to know a lot of the young men at the base, and that was when I knew Kurt LeMay. He was in the crowd that my sister went around with, and Henry, can't think of his name now, Bud Myers, who became President Roosevelt's pilot in Air Force One, or what was Air Corps plane then. But he was a close friend of the families because his mother and my mother had known each other for years. And Frank Andrews was CO at Selfridge for a while, and I went to high school with his son. And Ralph Royce, I think, was a major then, and I don't remember that he was ever mentioned in any of the World War II stuff I've read, but I believe that he replaced Colonel Andrews at that time as CO at Selfridge when Andrews was transferred, and that was before 41.
I see.
But his son, Scott Royce and Alan Andrews were friends of my best friend's big brother. So, and I rode horseback with Colonel Andrews' wife and daughters.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure that as people watch this and listen to your comments, immediately the names LeMay, Doolittle, Spots, even if people are just generally knowledgeable about aviation history, I'm sure they'll look on admiringly that you had firsthand knowledge and recollection of them. Did your parents get to know them on a personal level?
Oh, yes. Our house became sort of a center. My sister knew a lot of girls, and all these young boys wanted to meet girls.
I can imagine.
So, and Mother likes boys.
Okay.
So, and she was the one that told Kurt LeMay to take the cigar onto the porch. He could not smoke in her house.
Okay.
And that always amuses me because every picture I ever see of him, he has a cigar in his mouth.
Yeah.
And I look back and think of him as a kind of chubby little second lieutenant sitting there with a big cigar sticking out of his mouth.
Now, you were, what, 5'6", you say, about that time?
Well, when they were there, I was in my teens.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I was about 16 then.
Okay.
When I knew when Doolittle was there, and that crowd, I was only 5 or 6 then.
I see.
But I grew up like they did.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those teenage years. Did you get a chance to meet some of their family members, or was
I knew all of the family
Is that right?
members.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they had parties, and Mother and Dad were invited, and then, of course, the kids had parties at their quarters, like we had parties at my house. But I didn't know a lot of them. I was too young at 15 and 16. The ones I knew were my sister's dates.
Sure.
And then after the war, I dated people who were stationed at Selfridge. They were all F-80 pilots. But
so you've been immersed in aviation history as watching it firsthand, and I'm sure to this day you probably watch an appreciation at what we see in our modern Air Force.
I read anything I can. In fact, George is very good about lending me his Air Force magazines. And it's fascinating to me that women can fly now, and the things they're flying. But I did know one of the girls that was in the WASP.
Okay.
That ferried planes overseas.
Tell us about that.
Her name was Sammy Chapin, and of course there were lots of other people that did it. But her father was the president of Hudson Motor Company in Detroit, and she flew at the same airport that I flew at and where I taught ground school. So I got to know her and hear a little bit about flying the B-29s and B-26s. I think she had some time in a B-24, but she ferried planes to England.
Right. Now, we've mentioned these three gentlemen, and they all have various fascinating claims to fame. Did you have an opportunity and your family to stay in touch with them as they became more well-known and a higher profile through the years, or not?
No, because they were transferred all over the country.
Okay.
I can't remember any of them that we... Well, Andrews, I went out to General Andrews' grave with the girl who became his daughter-in-law, but of course he was dead by then. And Kay and I went out to the cemetery one time. She was Alan's wife, and I remember seeing my first military funeral there and weeping over it because the widow happened to be all by herself. she had no one with her except an Army officer. And when she took the flag, Kay and I just broke down because it seemed like she ought to have someone there. But there's something very impressive about a military funeral there.
Absolutely. Very touching and emotional
And
for anybody.
General Andrews is buried up on a hill,
Mm-hmm.
so that gave us a beautiful view of the whole cemetery.
I can imagine. Now, let's talk about General Doolittle, because he's fascinating in many respects, very much a Renaissance man, you might say, in that he had many interests. You're probably aware he was a race car driver
Yes.
at one point.
Yes,
Was your family aware of that? Or
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I remember maybe age 6 or 7, hearing my father cuss out the Air Force, or the Army Air Corps, for what they did to, what's his name, that they said that the Air Force could win wars. Mm-hmm. And I can't think of his name now, but he was court-martialed for it. George, I told you what his name was.
Billy Mitchell?
Billy Mitchell.
Correct.
Yeah. I remember hearing talk of Billy Mitchell when I was very, very young. Right. But they didn't know him personally. It was just, Dad had a very strong feeling that he was very badly treated. Right. But my father died in 32, and all of those people were by that time, not 32, 42. By that time, the people that we had known at Selfridge were all away. The first time I thought about General Doolittle again was when he led the flight to Tokyo. Mm-hmm. And I thought, golly, I knew him when he was the first or second lieutenant. I don't remember which, but I remember him as a sort of medium height, very slender young man.
Right. So do you remember about that time when he did indeed organize and lead that raid on Tokyo? That was a pivotal time, because after Pearl Harbor, there were a lot of things that ensued, but I believe that one event played a major role in the uplifting of spirits of the military and the civilian population.
I think it did too, but I don't remember much about how I was affected at that time, but I do remember reading later that, and I guess everybody knows this, that Kurt LeMay designed the firebombing of Japan. Right. Mm-hmm. And I was very impressed with that. I thought it was horrible, but at the same time, mm-hmm. I guess wars are not very pleasant at any point. But these are all just, they're memories that come popping back.
Sure.
And like I said, my memory of the OD wearing breeches and boots and a Sam Brown belt mm-hmm. and a sword at his side was in 1912. Okay. And then I remember that a young man that I knew very well, that was my sister's age, crashed in a P-12 at Selfridge. And that was a 2-seater, and I think the pilot rode in the front seat, as I remember, and his observer lived through the crash. Tompy didn't. Tompy was killed. Mm-hmm. But the observer lived through the crash, and his name was Dewey Miracle. And I have never forgotten that name in all these years.
Dewey Miracle.
Dewey Miracle.
Okay.